Hello there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we're looking at Chapter 15 of Book 7, which, again, Book 7 deals with his account of the best regime, and he's wrapping up it. Book 7 is a weird book in that sense that it gives a presentation of the best regime, as I said. He spells it out, the regime that we would pray for, right? The regime that we would hope for, pray for in the sense that it has nothing limiting it. We have good fortune. We have every. It would be what would the regime that you'd create if you had no limits, you had the ability to get the right kind of people, the right kind of territory, the right kind of resources, and so forth. It's not a regime that is limited in that sense. It's, again, what we would pray for, right? And then also now we've gotten to the point of discussing that regime, and now we're going to be looking at the question of education of that regime, or education of any regime in one sense. But this continues it, right? It continues the establishment of this regime. 15 goes very like this. Since the end appears to be the same for human beings, both in common and privately, so there must be necessary be there must necessarily be the same defining principle for the best man and the best regime. It is evident that the virtues or excellences, the arete, directed to leisure should be present, for it has been said repeatedly, peace is the end of war and leisure of occupation. Now, this is note 86. Again, occupation, escole, means lack of leisure, and scole means leisure, right? Escole, occupation. This is that funny aspect of the Greek, you know. In other words, scole is the opposite. Escole is the opposite of scole, right? Peace is the object of war, and leisure is the object of labor. Okay, this is this idea. And what's again, he leads us to the question. That's something he's even asserted back in Book 3. The idea that this question of the citizen, the good man and good citizen, right? And that and his assertion, even in Book 3, that only in the best regime would be the good man. The good man could be, the good citizen, the good man would be identical. Would be in this best regime, in the best regime. So therefore, this is something he's constantly reputed in the sense that this idea that what is the height of human excellence, human goodness, and what is the best citizen. The citizenship is what the virtue of the citizen is always relative to the regime. This is what he argued in Book 3. And now here he's now saying that okay, he's doing two things. He's asserting he said in his account of the big regime, he's going to be arguing that this is the best. This is what who is the citizen of this best regime is going to be the agathos, the good man, the good men, the agathoi, the good men, right? And therefore, what is good for people, what is the good end, okay, the highest end for the individual, and what is the good that is common to them are going to be identical. He's going to be saying here, what is it? The end, the purpose, what is common. Since the end appears to be the same, he says, and that is what leisure. Now, this is true. The regime that we're setting up here in this Book 7 has been a regime where it's going to be his argument is a political regime where the citizens have leisure. Hence, this is why they're not allowed to be laborers, they're not going to be farmers. You're going to have this idea that being free and being at leisure to be able to engage in politics or political rule or political activity means that therefore the regime has to have leisure or significant leisure. Now, the virtues or excellences useful with a view to leisure and pastime are both those that have their function in leisure and those that have it in occupation. In other words, they are. This is something he's saying. The virtues of this leisure and pastime, right? are both those that have their function in leisure and those that have it in occupation. So there's going to be some interlap between those, the virtues of those who work and occupation, labor, doing things, and those in leisure, right? For many of the necessary things should be present for it to be open to them to be at leisure. So therefore, there's going to still, in other words, you have to have the necessary things. You have, in other words, for that people to be at leisure, the necessary things of life of life must have been addressed, must have been present. If you don't have the necessary things, you can't have leisure. Okay. Hence, it is appropriate for the city that the city have moderation, courage, and endurance. For as the proverb has it, there is no leisure for slaves, and those who are incapable of facing danger in a courageous spirit are slaves to whoever comes to attack them. So, in other words, he makes a very important point here about the city. The city has to have virtue. The city has to have moderation, courage, and endurance. Why? Because if you don't have these things, you won't be able to be. In other words, it's essential. These are necessary things for the city. Because without this, you would not have the leisure. Because why? You'd be enslaved, right? You'd be enslaved. If you didn't have moderation, your regime would collapse. If you didn't have courage, you would be enslaved to others. Endurance means, again, all these virtues that are useful also from occupation is also necessary for one who in order to have leisure, right? Because as he says, there's no leisure as a slave, and those who are incapable of facing danger in a courageous spirit are slaves to whomever come along and attack them. Now, courage and endurance are required with a view to occupation, right? Now, courage and endurance are reviewed to occupation, right? Philosophy with a view to leisure. In other words, philosophy. Now, this idea of 80, this is going to be a real thing because Newman takes philosophy here means intellectual virtue, but this is by no means evident. Compare the whole discussion of habit, philosophy, and law in book 2, chapter 5, all the way back then in book 2, 5 about the best regime, the best regime Plato, right? The question of this idea of philosophy. Now, Newman argues this means the intellectual virtues, right? I think this is it's not clear. Philosophy is those, in other words, what is the thing that philosophy requires? Philosophy requires the exercise of thought, ideas, right? The best contemplation, um, and in other words, philosophy is and the virtues of philosophy, the things necessary for philosophy, the excellences that are necessary to engage in philosophy, right? But I think Newman is kind of right here, the intellectual virtues in that sense, but also some habits, right? That's book 2 about the discussion of Plato's laws, with view to leisure. Now, moderation and justice at both times, and in particular when they remain at peace and are at leisure. So, in other words, if you're at peace and at leisure, at both times, at peace and war, right? Uh, at both times, yeah. But by both times, he means both at leisure and peace, at peace and at occupation and at occupation and leisure, right? At both, right? That this is necessary, moderation and justice at both times, and particularly when they remain at peace and are at leisure. So if they're at peace and at leisure, they especially need moderation and justice. For war compels them to be just and behave with moderation, while the enjoyment of good fortune and being at leisure in peacetime tends to make them arrogant. Clear that line. In other words, this is the idea that war often brings necessities, and these necessities require moderation and also justice. Okay, he argues. Now, some people argue that war, that's not true, or there's no injustice. But by justice, I think he means correct action. Correct action. The correct action to the situation that is, and here justice may not mean justice in a pure sense, but justice is what is right to do, what is the right thing to do, what is the correct or true action here, and that might be we might understand that justice might mean having to kill your enemies. to slaughter your enemies. Okay, this is the thing. Today we would say, oh no, justice means happy, funny. We are all happy, kumbaya, lovey, lovey, everything's wonderful, happy. No, the right thing to do. Justice is doing the right thing. Justice is doing the right thing in the right way, to the right degree. In other words, you kill them, but not kill everybody. Or you kill those who need to be killed. In other words, that's justice. This is a more darker understanding of justice. Justice seems to be, doing what is right. Well, justice might mean punishing the wicked, punishing those who deserve to be punished, and rewarding those who deserve reward. But justice does not necessarily mean everyone gets rewarded and everyone gets goodies. It means you get what you deserve. And what do you deserve? Do you deserve reward or you deserve punishment? And everyone will get exactly what justice is, everyone getting exactly what they deserve. Okay. So be careful if you want justice. Okay. Sometimes getting justice is not necessarily a good thing. Okay. And there's a problem here he's saying about this, right? That, in other words, his argument that leisure gives you arrogance, can give you arrogance, but even peace, right? Leisure and peace and good fortune may lead you to be arrogant. That's dangerous, and that's very dangerous. And but however, that there is he goes, then there is much there is then a need for much justice and much moderation on the part of those who are to act in the best way, and those who have all the gratification with regarded as blessings, like those, if there are such, whom the poets asserts are in the island of the blessed. Now, 88. This is again dwelling place for the dead heroes, right? In Work of Days, the Island of the Blessed. In other words, they have everything. In other words, the idea that they're like the people in paradise. The Island of the Blessed is the place for heroes, the place the heroes are rewarded in the afterlife, right? Um, but the best regime, when people at this and they have leisure, they are not. They need the people at leisure who are able to be. They have all the blessings given to them. These people need moderation and justice as well. This is interesting. In other words, he's saying power. In other words, if you get all this benefit, all benefit, if you get blessed by luck and fortune and health and all these things, to keep it and to maintain it, you need courage and moderation, both moderation and justice, right? He says here. Justice and moderation. Why? Because if you don't have justice and moderation, you probably will lose it. You will probably lose all your things. In regarding to health, if you have good health, but then you're completely immoderate, you run the risk of losing your health. If you have wealth and prosperity, and you act immoderately and act unjust, could lose it. You might lose it. Okay, again, this is the idea here. So therefore, those who are blessed with everything, and those who have all the gratification that are regarded as blessings, these people are the ones who need. In other words, the great need virtue just as much as the weak. In fact, more so, because they have what they have, because they have had all these blessings and all these good things given to them. Um, uh, uh, um, they have, in a sense, for them to not take care of it and not preserve it and not maintain it is kind of like waste. It's like, and to squander a blessing is kind of blasphemous in this sense. It's kind of something, something shocking and unjust, or, you know, uh, pissing off the gods. Okay, right? Who's giving you? If fortune or the divine has given you all these great things and you squandered it, how do you think the divine is going to look at you in a sense, right? This is the idea. Therefore, this is worse. In other words, the person who has nothing, the person fortune and nature, fortune, and the gods have given nothing. Uh, uh, the gods are not going to judge them badly that they have nothing. They may not merit them as highly, but if the gods gave you if nature, the gods, fortune gives you all these blessings and you screw them up, it's not only your fault, but they're not going to. You've disappointed them. I mean, when the gods look at the poor, they're not going to be disappointed because the poor are poor. But when you were given everything and you got everything, and then you become weak, destructive, and you deserve more blame. You deserve more blame. Okay, that's the interesting point. Those who the great and the powerful, who have fortune has and luck, fortune, and providence has given their status. When they fail or they fail, the failure is theirs and the blame is theirs. When that's the whole point he's trying to hit here. This is why I think we should understand that this way. For there will be For these will be most particularly in need of philosophy and moderation and justice, to the extent that they are at leisure in the midst of abundance of good things of this sort. In other words, he's suggesting that the people who have all this excess, is all this good things, need philosophy the most. Why? Well, if you're poor, you don't need philosophy per se. You need the materials, you need the resources. Now you might have to use some. You might have to work. You need food. You will labor. You will toil. You have odium. You won't. It'd be very difficult. Now, here's the issue: Socrates. Socrates was always poor. Socrates didn't care about poverty or wealth. He didn't. He had. He got taken care. He let his friends take care of the needs of his family and things like this. In fact, he put everything on his friends rather than doing things. Taking care of these things himself, because he didn't think that those things were important. He thought taking care of his own soul and philosophizing was all important. And this is the problem of Socrates, right? Socrates, look at Socrates and saying, well, Socrates didn't necessarily have all this wealth and things. He didn't care about wealth, the argument goes. He cared about living, what was best, and what was best was knowing what the gods and the truth about things were, and engaging in philosophy. And philosophy was his means to achieve knowing those things or obtaining the knowledge about those things. And therefore, he threw his life into philosophy rather than making money and taking care of the necessities of life. Now, this is not necessarily a good thing, right? But he's saying now what Aristotle says in this passage here is that those who have have all this wealth and have this abundance will need philosophy and moderation and justice to the extent that they're at leisure, right? In the midst of the abundance of these good things of this sort. Now, why a city that is going to exist happily and be serious, supudaios, should partake in these virtues then is evident. In other words, this is the idea that if a city is going to exist, is going to be happy, right, and excellent and serious, supudaios, it needs to partake in the virtues of here, which was not only courage, moderation, and justice, but also what? Philosophy. For it is because in philosophy, because they have leisure. It's philosophy is to understand how to, in other words, knowing how to effectively and correctly use leisure. In other words, that this is for the sake of how leisure itself will be used, to know what is good, to know what is just, to know what is true. For if it is disgraceful not to be capable of using good things, it is still more so to be incapable of using them at leisure. In other words, if you don't know, it is disgraceful not to be capable of using good things, right? That's one thing. It's even worse when you have leisure. In other words, under necessity and things like that, you might not be able to use it, but at leisure means you have no excuse that you couldn't use it, okay? So yes, not using them, not knowing how to use them is, in other words, it is disgraceful not being capable of using good things. That's true, but it's actually worse. But then you have excuses if under necessity. But if you're at complete leisure, no, capable of using them in leisure. But to be seen to be good while occupied and at war, but servile when remaining at peace and being at leisure. That's the problem, right? This is the real debate. that you're seen to be good men, or occupied in war, occupation of war. That's one thing. That's it. In other words, if you're busy, when you're tied by necessity, tied by things that you come across as being good. But when you are at leisure, you are servile. In peace, when you're at peace and you're at being at leisure, you are servile, slavish. That is really disgraceful. In other words, in other words, he's saying that is incapable of using them. In other words, still, no, it's bad enough that you can't use good things, but still, when you can't use them when you're at leisure. Now you can use them. Now it's even this example he gives. You're able to be good and noble while at war and occupied, but when you're at leisure, you're slavish and servile. Okay, that's the servile, right? At peace and leisure. Okay. Hence, one should not train in virtue as the city of the Spartans do. So again, he's repeating his criticism of Sparta, right? But let's go. Remember, most of this regime looks very much. The regime of Book 7 looks very much like Sparta in many senses. The way, for it does not. For it is not in this way that they differ from others, but not considering the greatest of good things to be the same thing others do, but by considering that these things are to be gotten through some sort of virtue. For it is not in this way that they differ from others. In other words, the Spartans not train in the virtue and the Spartans do, right? They train for war, right? And war, the greatest, in other words, by not considering the greatest of good to be the same thing others do, right? But they don't. They the problem is that they don't differ from others because they disagree about what the greatest goods are. But by considering that these things are to be gotten through some sort of virtue. In other words, the virtue of in other words, they believe that wealth and money and these things, they don't disagree about what are the ends, he's saying. The Spartans aren't really differing regarding to the real ends, the real purpose of why they're getting there. They agree to the ends, but they think that the best way to do it is by using virtue. In other words, he's arguing that the Spartan understanding of virtue is still it's not virtue to achieve the highest things, but rather virtue to achieve what everyone else agrees to be, like power, wealth, and things like that. But since they consider these good things and the gratification deriving from them to be the greater than than that deriving from the virtues, and how bracket, right? This is that weird bracket, this is that long bracket. The sort of virtue in which they are trained is only that useful and necessary for the acquisition of good things. That the sort of virtue is required to be cultivated. In other words, the sort of virtue is rather to be the correct sort of virtue is rather to be cultivated that governs the use of these good things. That is preeminently the sort of virtue that the cultivated in leisure, and that is to be cultivated on its own accord, is evident from these things. Now, this passage is a big mess, and in fact, this is one of those things that we'll be saying. This Lucana and possibly sufficient length of make this point. He supplies what the basic means of this is. This is one of these paragraphs in Aristotle that drive everyone crazy because it's fragmented. Things have been cut out. They think in different copyings of the text. Now, let's think about these things. In other words, they consider the good things gratification deriving. In other words, virtue as a means to gratify from the good things. In other words, virtue. What does he say here? He says that he considers the good things and the gratification deriving from them to be greater than what is directly arriving from being gratifying the virtues. In other words, these things, these goods, are better than the virtues. Okay, they treat virtue as a means to achieve these pleasant, good things. But since they consider these, but since they consider these good things and gratifications deriving from them to be greater than that deriving for the virtue, right? Virtues, the sort of virtue in which they are trained is that only useful and necessary for the acquisition of good things. Therefore, this is the problem with Spartan education. The Spartan education is only trained for war, right? War to get, right? Discipline to get, but it's not really knows how to enjoy them, knows how to exercise them at leisure. They're not comfortable at leisure. They're only comfortable at war, right? That that the sort of virtue is rather to, in other words, the correct sort of virtue, right, is one that is to be cultivated. In other words, he's using the metaphor of cultivation. Now, this is interesting. To cultivate the ground, to grow it, to grow it. In other words, we're going to grow it. We're going to take the nature of the thing, the human person, the nature, and treat it like you're going to plant. You're going to cultivate it. You're going to grow it. This is what education, what paideia is, right? Paideia education. Cultivate it in leisure. In other words, we're going to cultivate that. And what is that? It's cultivate that governs the use of these good things. So the virtue is going to be cultivated. Learns how to use these good things. Used that is preeminently the sort of virtue that is cultivated in leisure, and that it is to be cultivated on its own accord. In other words, it's not going to be done for the sake of other things, but rather the use of these good things in themselves. In other words, the use of these good things in virtue, these good things and these the things that are virtue aiming at, are not aimed at trying to get other things, but rather they are ends in themselves. They're not means to other goods. They are the goods that you train and educate that have the virtue to exercise and use are for their own sake, right? On their own account is evident from this point. He goes, how and through what things it will exist is what to be studied now. So now this is the shift of not only the question of the shift of this question about how and through what things it will exist, that these goods, this cultivation of knowing how to use the good things, right? How to cultivate the good things. Again, paideia, this education, right? Will things it will exist, and how this must now be studied. We made a distinction earlier to the effect that there is a need for nature, habit, and reason. Again, this is three things, right? Nature, habit, and reason. Logos. Phusis, ethos, logos, right? Of these things, what quality the citizen ought to be in their nature was discussed earlier, right? What remains is to study whether they are to be educated first by means of reason or by habits. In other words, the nature of things we dealt with, the phusis, look at their nature. But now we have to deal with the question of habit and reason, logos and ethos. Now, logos is reasoning, speech and reasoning, and the other one is the habit. Means know what habits are. Habits are aspects or customs or behavior traits that we've done over time, right? Things that we're used to doing. It's kind of a routine or a practice that we generated to simply just do something, right? Habit, Aristotle says in the Ethics, is a kind of second nature that each one of us creates, and this affects society. And we speak of habit as what belongs to individuals. We speak of mores or customs as what mores, customs regards to groups and communities and networks of people, groups of people, right? These should be constant. I'm freaking about this word. They should be constant. Yeah, constant with one another. and the constant should a constant should be the best. The constant one, what is consistent, constant for the be the best. For it is possible for one or both to have missed the best presupposition in regards to reason, and to have been similarly guided by habits. In other words, you could not. In other words, here's the problem. Reason, we determine this, habits like this. You can necessarily make the wrong judgment, make the wrong presupposition regarding in respect to reason, and to have been guided, similarly guided by habits. In other words, what reason dictates. In other words, you could do the right thing because you've been trained by others. Habit is being what you've been trained to do by others. What you yourself did, or what others have kind of inculcated into you, patterns of behavior that others inculcate into you. Um, uh, um, Now, this idea here is possible. In other words, should be constant with one another. I mean, they should be reason and habit should be, an agreement. They should be kind of what this says and what this says should be kind of similar or agreement. And the constant should be the best. What works best, right? What is constant is what is best, what works best, what achieves the things. In other words, to have what is our reason, what reason tells us should tell us what is best for us, or what is true, and what is true is best. It's useful, beneficial, good. Not what is true is not harmful, harmful, false, useless. Um, Rather, it is beneficial, good, true. Same. This is both true for habits and for reason, right? And therefore, there must be a consistency that a good habit and a good reason should echo each other, do the same kind of thing. In other words, a good habit should not produce bad results. It should produce good results, good activities, good things, useful for it, beneficial to it, right? And he says that it is both possible for one or both to have missed the best presupposition respect to reason, and to have been similarly guided by habits. This then is evident at any rate in the first instant, when men just as, among other things, that birth derives from the beginning point, and ends from some beginning point that is the end of something else. Now, 9D, literally, the meaning of this is uncertain. The text may be corrupt. The argument appears to be just as birth is the beginning of something simply, but derives from a prior beginning point in the act of generation. So the end or completion of human being does not derive simply beginning from one simple beginning point, but proceeds from a number of stages. The end of one being the beginning point of the next, right? I think that is the case right here. In other words, I think this line here is that, in other words, birth begins, but something else preceded birth, right? Conception, right? In other words, the conception of the child is precedes the birth of the child, but the birth is the beginning of our life, right? And then as we grow, each stage, it becomes what? It becomes the starting point of another stage, um, and that's the point. But reason and intellect are the ends of our nature. So reason and intellect are at the end of our nature, so that it is with a view to these that birth and and the concern with habits should be handled. In other words, reason deals with ends, goals, purposes. Why are we doing this? What is the purpose for this, right? And therefore, both birth is concerned with, aims towards that question. Why? What is life for? What is this thing for? What the ends that reason concerns? And so, to have habits should also be tied to those, should be governed by those ends as well, right? The ends of reason. Next, just as soul and body are two things, so also we see two parts of the soul, the irrational and that having reason, having logos, right? Not that's interesting. I think participating in logos, having not it was not the rational and the irrational, but the irrational and that part that possesses or engages with rational reason, right? And in other words, this is that famous saying: "Man is not the rational animal, but man is the animal capable of reasoning." That's the most. That's Swift's redefinition. The rational animal that people argue that man is a rational animal. That's a misreading of Aristotle. Man is the animal capable of using reason, not that they're rational, but they're capable of having or using reason. And the disposition belonging to these are two in number. One of which is appetite, and the other is intellect. So appetite, desire, appetite, right? This is appetite, which we understand as desire, right? And the other is intellect, the mind of the contemplation of the aspect of this. And just as the body is prior in birth to the soul, so is the irrational part to that having reason. So, in other words, in other words, the irrational part of the soul is prior; it's first, and then the rational part emerges out of the irrational part. Okay. In other words, it is. In other words, it's very interesting that the body. But here's that the body is prior in birth to the soul. This is why the psyche. This is the question. The psyche. Aristotle, we would say, but the soul is before the body, right? No, no, no. The understanding of soul is the mind, the psyche, the internal mind, the internal thing, the internal disposition, and the physical matter is prior. The egg, the DNA strands together, and the form, the form and the thing and the matter is prior to the construction of the psyche. So the body, just as the body is prior in birth to the soul, so is the irrational part to that having reason. This too is evident for spiritedness, thumos, and will. Okay, here I'm going to look at this question. Will, I think will is that. I think that's the wrong word. I think it is desire. I think it is. Yeah, this I had freeze you for a second because I needed to go look at this and the Greek. See, again, Lord's translation here, will. I looked at both Reeves. I know something was funny here. Will is the bad word because Greeks don't have the concept of will is very much a modern conception. It follows maybe from Saint Augustine and this idea of willing agency, this idea of will, the will, and things like that. Um, there's no such there's a problem about will. What is meant by will, and both I looked at both Reeves' translation, the second translation, and Simpson's, and also the Greek, and it's boulos, it's from boule, which wish, right? This is tied to what we wish, or an aspect. It is kind of now it is tied to agency and choice. So we can say, oh, well, this is the basis of willing, right? I could see what this idea that there's aspect, there's an aspect of agency here of wishing. I would wish this. I would like that. I would like this to happen. I would want this to happen, right? Want or wish, desire it in that sense. And that there's a distinction here between this kind of desire and this and in fact, these are connected. This is why he needs to do this for evident spiritedness, thumos, and desire, prayer, wish, and furthermore, desire are present in children immediately upon their being born. In other words, these three things. In other words, we have they want something. They see something, they want it. They want it. They have desire. That means that they long for something. Right? Desire is tied to there's something lacking in them. Desire is kind of tied to what is lacking. They must have it. Right? This is This is desire. That desire has something compels. Wish is like, oh, I'd like this. It's an agency, but it's not necessarily something compulsion. Desire is something compulsion. Something's compulsing you you need it, you lack it. Desire is like that in that sense. These three things: spiritedness, thumos. In other words, will, uh, uh, wish, and desire are present in children immediately on their being born, while reasoning and intellect uh, develop naturally in them as they go along. So therefore, it doesn't occur. In other words, he's saying that it's not simply reason and intellect is not simply just present at children. These other things, spiritedness, wish, and desire, are present at birth. But reasoning and intellect, these are not, and they do develop, right, as they go along. Hence, the first instance, the superintendence of the body must necessarily precede that of the soul. In other words, superintendence, those things necessary for the body, those things, the superintendents of the body, those who are going to take care of the things that need to take care of the body, precede that of the soul. Next comes that of the appetite. But that of the appetite is for the sake of the intellect, and that of the body for the sake of the soul. So, therefore, in other words, the purpose of these things is not, in other words, it's the appetites are for, they must be taken, must be addressed, right? They need to be addressed, but they're not the end. They are for the sake of what the higher thing. The soul is higher than the body, but the body comes first. The reason and intellect is higher than spiritedness, thumos, boleos, desire, not desire, but wish, and desire. Right? These are present. These are for the sake of reason and intellect. Okay, as the body is for the sake of the soul. That's his argument, and this is how he ends the chapter. This is a long chapter, so it's not really that long, but it took some time. We'll stop here. We will all have a good time next week. My clock is wrong. I just noticed we had to. It's almost 3 o'clock now, so I've been kind of misguided here. I forgot that last night the daytime. So we'll stop here. You have any questions or issues or questions, comments, or things like that, please put them below. And then when I see them, I'll respond to them and answer this. If you liked it, like it. Share it with a friend. Put it on social media, please. Now, you're boring, yes. This is only about the best regime, so of course, but like it. Liking it helps the channel grow a little bit. Another thing you can do is you can post on your social media and send it to friends. If you've not already subscribed, subscribe so we can grow the channel. Encourage your friends to subscribe, or those you think someone who'd be interested in this. Please introduce someone who are interested in these kind of topics of, like, let's say, politics or Aristotle, to these series. Okay, maybe they can enjoy the series. Again, growing. So subscribe. If you didn't like it, put your negative comment, but please say why in the comments. Like, I didn't like it because you didn't do something X, Y, Z. That's why I can, so I can improve, right? The other thing you can do is, if you want to follow me on social media, the links are below. If you want to help contribute to what I do here, this things, I'd help, because every little bit of helps on this thing. Until I grow the channel, you can't donate money directly. Kid, I'm not big enough to get monetized, even though I get ads in my channel now. I'm told people say, "There's ads on your channel." I'm not monetized, so I shouldn't have it, but there it is. Another way you can help, if you can't, don't want to do Patreon and Subscribe Star, because I understand, there's no one there really. Okay, what you can do is buy this book. This is my book I made for students to do things. This is a notebook on Aristotle's politics. I published it in September 2022. It's designed for students or students who are and it varied both in the introductory students and also more advanced students who are studying the politics. And this is a guide. This is like a Cliff's Notes. It's not a mere summary. It is tools and things to approach the text, about how to understand the text, how to approach the text as a whole, and then going through each book chapter by chapter by chapter with charts, graphs, going through the lists of things and highlighting, fleshing out, explaining things again like Cliff's Notes. Now, offering some summarizations, but also some questions about how to approach things, some themes that are at stake, addressing some of the themes that each section or chapter deals or book deals with, and then even gives you a point where you can put notes and comments on things. Okay, charts, graphs, and things. It's again a very useful instrument. And if you buy it by Lulu, it's available at Barnes and Noble and all the online distributors. You can get it. Okay, but if you buy it at Lulu directly, I make the profit that Barnes and Nobles or Amazon will make. So please, I understand, but Lulu doesn't give free shipping in those places. Okay, I understand. If you really want the free shipping, you can go get it. I'll get something, but I won't get as much as if you bought it by Lulu directly. So please think about getting a copy, getting it for a friend, getting it for a student of this. My wife is right. Before TikTok ends, I should do a little video about this to kind of sell this, because I think I'm surprised it's not okay. Yes, it's 30, it's now 20 something bucks. This is again because of the stupid inflation we've had for the past 5 or 6 years, 4 or 5 years. Um, this was perfectly designed for undergraduates and graduate students alike, studying the politics. Everyone studies, at most American schools and UK schools, you take a course in history, political theory, or great texts, core texts in history, history thought. You would run into each year probably thousands or tens of thousands of students in America, and about a couple thousand, tens of thousands at least tens of thousands of students in the Anglo-American world that is taking a course on this and studying the politics for these parts of the course. And this is a very useful topic. If only 100 bought it a year, I'd be happy. But so far there's not been. I've been sales. It's been good, but it's not been as good as I thought it would be, given what this is. It's a very useful topic, and it should be useful for you. Okay, with that, I'm going to end. Have a good day. See you next time when we look at the next chapter 16 here. See? Take care. Bye bye.